The silence inside the Accademia Musicale Chigiana in Siena is usually reserved for the delicate strings of a Stradivarius. But on January 13, 2026, that silence was shattered by a sound that felt like a sacrilege to some and a salvation to others. It was the mechanical growl of a machine that shouldn't, by all traditional laws of its heritage, even exist. As the lights hit the stage, the world caught its first glimpse of the Prima Pramac Yamaha livery, purple, blue, and a raw, aggressive energy that signaled the end of one era and the violent birth of another. This wasn't just a team launch. It was a declaration of war from a Japanese giant that had been pushed to the brink of irrelevance. For 20 years, Yamaha stood alone, the last stubborn guardian of the Inline-Four engine. They said it was their DNA. They said it was the soul of the M1. But after a disastrous 2025 season that saw them languishing at the back of the grid, the soul had to be sacrificed for the sake of survival. Beside the bike stood two men who represented the ultimate gamble. Jack Miller, the Australian veteran who had been discarded by the elite, and Toprak Razgatlioglu, the Turkish phenom who many believed was the only human capable of stopping the dominance of Marquez. No one inside the paddock expected what would unfold next. The rumors had been circulating for months, but as the covers came off in Siena, the reality set in. Yamaha hadn't just built a new bike. They had built a monster. And it would change everything for them, their rivals, and the entire landscape of the 2026 championship. But behind the polished fairings and the flashing cameras in Italy, the atmosphere was thick with a tension that had been building for 3 years. To understand why Yamaha took this radical step, you have to understand the depth of their collapse. For decades, the Yamaha M1 was the rider's bike, the most balanced melodic machine on the grid. It won titles with Valentino Rossi and Jorge Lorenzo because it traded raw power for surgical precision in the corners. But in the modern era of ride-height devices and massive aerodynamic wings, that precision was no longer enough. The Bologna bullets from Ducati had turned MotoGP into a drag race, and Yamaha was losing. Inside the garage, whispers began spreading as early as mid-2024. Fabio Quartararo, the man who had dragged the Inline-Four to a world title in 2021, was losing faith. Reports from deep within the technical briefings suggested that the Japanese engineers were at a crossroads: continue refining a dead concept or destroy their legacy to build a V4. The decision was painful. To build a V4 engine meant throwing away 20 years of data. It meant admitting that the European manufacturers had won the technical argument. But as the 2025 results continued to plummet, the order finally came down from Iwata. The Inline-Four was dead. Yet the real turning point happened away from the cameras. Yamaha didn't just need a new engine, they needed a new team. They needed a satellite operation that knew how to win. And that's when they turned their eyes toward the most successful independent team in the history of the sport, Pramac Racing. But what the paddock discovered next shocked everyone. Pramac wasn't just joining Yamaha for the technology, they were fleeing a civil war at Ducati that had left them feeling like second-class citizens. The divorce between Pramac and Ducati was the messiest breakup the paddock had seen in a decade. Just 12 months prior, Pramac had been standing on top of the world as the 2024 team champions. They were the golden children of Borgo Panigale, the team that nurtured young talent for the factory squad. But everything changed the moment Marquez entered the frame. When the 8-time world champion rejected a move to Pramac, opting instead for the factory seat, the internal hierarchy shattered. Pramac's owner, Paolo Campinotti, felt the sting of the snub. He realized that no matter how many races they won, they would always be a B team in the eyes of the Ducati board. And from that moment, nothing would ever be the same. Yamaha saw the opening. They offered Pramac something Ducati never would, a factory-light status. Yamaha would pay the multi-million-dollar salaries of the riders directly. They would provide 100% factory support. They offered a partnership, not a customer relationship. The 2025 season was a brutal transition. Pramac went from the fastest bike on the grid to a Yamaha that was still finding its feet. There were weekends where the frustration was visible on every mechanic's face. The data didn't make sense. The tires wouldn't hook up. The riders were coming back to the pits with arms pumped and spirits broken. Yet the move to Yamaha wasn't a mistake. It was a long-term play for 2026. They were clearing the decks for the V4. They were waiting for the human library and the Turkish lightning to arrive. However, the twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely. It wasn't just about the bike. It was about the man they hired to develop it, a man who had been written off by every factory he had ever raced for. Inside the garage, pressure was building fast on Jack Miller. The Australian has always been the paddock's favorite wild child, but in 2026 he found himself in a role he never expected: the professor. Yamaha didn't sign Miller for his qualifying pace alone. They signed him because of his brain. Miller is a rare breed, the only rider on the grid who has competitive experience on the V4s of Ducati, Honda, and KTM. He is a walking encyclopedia of how a V4 engine should deliver power and how a chassis should react under load. When Miller first sat on the prototype V4 Yamaha during secret winter tests, the feedback was reportedly blunt. Insiders claimed he told the engineers that the bike felt like a Frankenstein. It had the aggression of a KTM, but the electronic confusion of an early Honda. According to rumors, the tension during these early technical meetings was high. The Japanese engineers, famous for their methodical and sometimes slow pace, were being pushed by Miller's Aussie urgency. He knew that at 31 years old, this was his last chance at a factory-level project. If he couldn't make this bike work, his career was over. Miller's mission was simple but nearly impossible: translate the language of a V4 into the Yamaha electronic system. He spent hours analyzing telemetry, comparing the way the Ducati exited corners versus how the new Yamaha prototype was spinning its rear tire. But as Miller struggled with the mechanical birth pains of the V4, all eyes shifted to the other side of the garage. Because while Miller was the brains, the man in the next stall was the pure, unadulterated fire that Yamaha hoped would burn the rest of the grid to the ground. Toprak Razgatlioglu is not a normal motorcycle racer. In the world of world superbikes, he became a god by doing things with a bike that physics shouldn't allow. His stoppie entries, where the rear wheel is 2 feet off the ground while he's still braking at 150 mph, are his signature. But for years, the MotoGP paddock looked at him with a mix of awe and skepticism. He's too old, they said. The Michelin tires won't suit his style, others whispered. Even his first test with Yamaha years ago was labeled a disappointment by the media. Yet the Toprak that walked into the Valencia test in late 2025 was a different animal. He was a 3-time world champion. He was faster, stronger, and more calculated. When he took to the track on the Yamaha M1, the paddock went silent. By the end of the day, he was just 1.3 seconds off the fastest time, the leading rookie by a massive margin. But it wasn't the lap time that stunned the engineers, it was the data. Toprak was braking later than anyone in the Yamaha history books. He was forcing the front end of the bike into positions that even Quartararo couldn't reach. Some mechanics claimed something felt off, that the bike shouldn't be able to survive that kind of abuse. But Toprak didn't care. He was riding a MotoGP bike like a superbike, and it was working. The media began to speculate. Could this be the rival Marquez finally fears? Toprak's style is as aggressive as Marc, but with a level of precision that comes from years of wrestling heavy production bikes. But what happened after that left even his closest team members stunned. Toprak wasn't just there to learn. He was there to win, and he was already making demands that the Yamaha factory wasn't prepared for. While the riders were fighting on the track, a political war was erupting in the offices of IRTA and Dorna. Because Yamaha had finished at the bottom of the standings in 2025, they were granted Rank D concessions for the 2026 season. In simple terms, Yamaha was given a set of keys that no one else had. While Ducati, KTM, and Aprilia had their engine designs frozen for the season, Yamaha was allowed to change their engine specs every single race if they wanted to. They were allowed more testing days, more tires, and more freedom to experiment. This created a massive rift in the paddock. Rival team managers began to voice their concerns. How could a team with the resources of Yamaha be allowed to cheat the development curve? But for Yamaha, it was a lifeline. It meant that every mistake Miller and Toprak found on a Sunday could be redesigned in a lab on Monday and racing by Friday. They were essentially using the 2026 season as a laboratory on wheels. The most controversial part of this advantage was the shakedown test in Malaysia. Because of the concessions, Toprak, a rookie, was allowed extra days on track that the veterans like Bagnaia and Marquez weren't. Rumors suggested deeper tension behind closed doors during the safety commission meetings. Rivals argued that giving a talent like Toprak more track time was like giving a shark a head start in a swimming race. Yet this was only the beginning of a far bigger storm, because as much as the rules favored Yamaha, the bike was still a prototype, and prototypes are dangerous. Back in the heart of Siena, the launch event reached its crescendo. The riders took the stage at the Accademia Musicale Chigiana, a venue known for its history and prestige. It was a calculated move by Pramac, a way to show that they were the elite satellite team. Jack Miller, looking leaner and more focused than ever, spoke about the new philosophy at Yamaha. He didn't promise wins immediately, he spoke about the process. But his eyes told a different story. He knew he was the underdog and he loved it. Then came Toprak. The Turkish star looked out of place in the formal Italian setting, a man of action trapped in a world of ceremony. When asked about his goals, he didn't give the standard rookie answer. He spoke about the podium. He spoke about Marquez. He spoke about the V4. The livery itself was a masterpiece, a blend of the deep Yamaha blue and the vibrant Pramac purple. But the technical observers noticed something else. The aero package on the 2026 bike was unlike anything Yamaha had ever produced. It featured massive Stegosaurus wings on the tail and a sophisticated ground effect fairing that looked like it belonged on a Formula One car. The message was clear: the old Yamaha, the one that relied on smoothness and finesse, was gone. This new machine was designed for the stop-and-go era of modern racing. It was built to be wrestled. It was built for Toprak. But as the champagne flowed, a question hung in the air. Could a bike designed for one man's extreme style be ridden by anyone else? Or had Yamaha traded one problem for another? The transition from the cool air of Siena to the stifling humidity of Sepang, Malaysia, was a brutal wake-up call. The 2026 shakedown test was the first time the V4 Yamaha would be pushed to its absolute thermal limits. Reports from the track suggested that the first few days were a nightmare. The new V4 engine was producing so much heat that the fairings were beginning to warp. The electronics, designed for an Inline-Four, were struggling to manage the violent torque of the V4. Miller was reportedly seen in heated arguments with the lead electronic engineers in the back of the garage. The bike was snatching at the throttle, making it impossible to carry the corner speed that is Yamaha's trademark. But then Toprak went out. While Miller was trying to fix the bike, Toprak was trying to break it. He ignored the electronic glitches and simply rode around them. He was seen sliding the bike into turn 1 at angles that shouldn't have been possible. The paddock whispers began to change. People weren't asking if the Yamaha was good anymore. They were asking how Toprak was doing what he was doing. Insiders claimed that the Yamaha engineers were in shock. They had spent months worrying about rideability, but Toprak had shown them that if the bike had raw power, he would find a way to handle the rest. Yet the real turning point happened away from the cameras. A private meeting between Miller and Toprak led to a breakthrough. They realized they couldn't both ride the bike the same way. Miller would focus on the base for the season, while Toprak would be the spearhead for the Sunday results. You cannot talk about 2026 without talking about the shadow that looms over every rider: Marquez. By 2026, Marquez was fully integrated into the factory Ducati team. He was the benchmark. Every rider on the grid, from Bagnaia to Quartararo, was measuring themselves against the 93. But Toprak represents something Marquez hasn't faced in a long time: a rider who is just as comfortable with chaos as he is. In the past, Marquez could out-psyche his rivals by being more aggressive, by braking later, and by taking more risks. But Toprak Razgatlioglu doesn't have a quit button. In World Superbikes, he went head-to-head with some of the most aggressive riders in the world and never blinked. Speculation emerged that Marquez was watching the Yamaha V4 project closely. He knew that the rank D concessions gave Yamaha a massive development speed. If they could get the V4 within 2% of the Ducati's performance, Toprak's talent could bridge the rest of the gap. The rivalry started before the first race. Social media wars between the Turkish mafia, Toprak's massive fan base, and the Marquez fans began to erupt. Every lap time from testing was dissected and debated. The narrative was set. It was the king of the old world versus the challenger from the new world. And Yamaha was the weapon that would decide the outcome. As the 2026 season approached its opening round, the pressure on Prima Pramac Yamaha reached a boiling point. They were no longer the underdog satellite team. They were the center of the MotoGP universe. For Paolo Campinotti, the owner of Pramac, the stakes were personal. He had put his reputation on the line by leaving Ducati. If the Yamaha project failed, Pramac would go from champions to backmarkers in the span of 2 years. For Yamaha, it was about more than just trophies. It was about their identity as a manufacturer. They had invested hundreds of millions into the V4 project. If they couldn't win with a V4, they would have no more excuses left. The fans were divided. Some mourned the loss of the beautiful Inline-Four M1, seeing the V4 as a soulless copy of the European bikes. Others saw it as the necessary evolution of a legendary brand. But inside the garage, the noise didn't matter. There was only the data, the heat of the Malaysian sun, and the relentless pursuit of speed. What happened next left even the most seasoned paddock veterans stunned. During the final hours of the Sepang test, the timesheets showed something that no one, not even Yamaha, had dared to hope for. The gap to the top wasn't 1.3 seconds anymore, it was shrinking, and the man at the top of the Yamaha pile wasn't the veteran Miller, it was the rookie from Bagnaia. The 2026 season began not with a whimper, but with a roar. The launch in Siena was the opening note of a symphony that would play out across 22 races around the globe. Jack Miller and Toprak Razgatlioglu represent the two halves of Yamaha's soul. Miller is the bridge to the past, the man who knows how the mountain was climbed before. Toprak is the leap into the future, the man who doesn't care how it was done, only how fast it can be done now. Yamaha is the only manufacturer with the Rank D advantage, but they are also the manufacturer with the most to lose. They have sacrificed their heritage, their engine design, and their comfort zone for one goal: to see the blue and purple fairings back on the top step of the podium. The paddock remains skeptical. They say the V4 is too new, they say Toprak is too raw, they say Miller is past his prime. But as the lights go out for the first race of the season, none of that matters. The purple power of Pramac and the Japanese engineering of Yamaha have merged into something the sport hasn't seen before. The revolution has begun. And in the world of MotoGP, the only thing more dangerous than a champion with everything to lose is a giant with everything to prove. The 2026 season will not be won by the fastest bike or the smartest team. It will be won by the ones who can survive the chaos of a new era. And for Yamaha, the chaos is exactly where they want to be.